Okay, so what I want you to do is for next week is this. I want you to read the PDF of the new chapters, and and then I am also going to post the Ordinance of Secession, the Texas Ordinance of Secession from February of 1861. Now, to talk about Texas very briefly, Texas had had a very short but very intense experience with slavery. As most of you know, and hopefully you know it anyway, Texas had been part of Spain until 1821. It had been part of Mexico until 1836. Then it becomes an independent nation and then becomes part of the United States in 1845. And what you had in Texas, beginning during the Mexican period, was a tremendous increase in the number of slaves. Uh, East Texas, the area all the way from Dallas, but especially nearer to Houston and inland to LaGrange, was one of the most fertile areas, cotton growing areas in all of North America. So basically, what happens in Texas is slavery goes. There were maybe, I don't know, in 1820, a handful of slaves in Spanish Texas, probably less than 100. By 1830, as Anglos start coming into Mexican Texas, there are 5,000 slaves in Texas. By then, after Texas becomes the Republic of Texas, you have more slaves coming in. The number of slaves in Texas more than doubles between 1850 and 1860. And what slaves are used for, in the most part, is the production of cotton. There was a huge demand, global demand for cotton. And a lot of white Southerners got very rich growing cotton in places like East Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and sending it into global markets. So, Texas, uh, slavery in Texas is a fairly short-lived phenomenon. It only goes from the 1820s until 1865, when the Civil War ends and the Emancipation Proclamation takes effect in Texas, as well as the 13th Amendment, which ended slavery. But what's important is that the the folks that moved into either Mexican Texas or into the Republic of Texas, or when Texas became a state, the folks that moved into Texas beginning in the 1820s were overwhelmingly from southern states. They were whites who believed in slavery and believed that slave labor, especially growing cotton, was absolutely essential to the future economic success of Texas and their own future economic success as well. So, although Texas is on the western edge of the slave South, it is a very southern state. It's a very southern state, especially because of the folks that had moved into Texas in the previous 40 years. They'd moved into Texas from places like Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, and I'm talking about whites now, they brought their feelings about the importance of slavery with them. Now, you're not going to read this in the first part of the Dew book, but Dew boils down the fear of emancipation into three basic causes. There are three things that white Southerners, including white Texans, feared when it came to the question of the emancipation of slaves. Whites in the South had been very aware that there had been a successful slave revolt in Haiti in the 1790s and that culminated in the early 1800s. And this was a bloody, bloody slave revolt. It was probably the most successful slave revolt in all of human history. The slaves in Haiti defeated the French army of Napoleon. And whites were super aware of what had gone on in Haiti, super aware, whites in the South, because this was their own nightmare come true, and it was happening basically next door in an island in the Caribbean. So white Southerners are terrified, and again, I'm not making excuses for them. I'm trying to explain their thinking. They're terrified of another Haiti. And one of the things that's important about the Haitian Revolution was it was extraordinarily violent. Uh, well over 100,000 people were killed in this, and mostly the majority of slaves. But you had a number of atrocities in Haiti. It was a very, very vicious battle between the races, between the minority of white Frenchmen who lived there and their slaves. And ultimately, the whites were driven out of Haiti very, very violently. So white Southerners are very, very aware of this. This is one of the things that terrifies them about Lincoln. They think, well, this is going to lead to another Haiti. Okay, so what are the things that white Southerners fear? And by looking at all these documents, these uh, ordinances of secession in the various southern states, and these what he calls these apostles of disunion. These were folks that traveled around the states of the South trying to convince southern states to leave the Union. What he looks at is this: the fear of a race war. This is one of the things these folks are pushing. That Lincoln's election is going to lead to a race war. That Lincoln, although he promises he's not going to end slavery immediately, is anti-slavery. Slaves are going to get wind of this, and there is going to be a race war. Number two, there is fear of racial mixing. You just can't. It's very hard for 2016 students to wrap their mind around the horror that whites felt over the very idea about racial mixing. It's just kind of inconceivable, I think, to, well, maybe some 2016 students, but most 2016 students, it's just not that big a deal. Well, whites were horrified at the thought of this. They thought it would lead to a degeneration of the white race. It would mongrelize the white race. And again, I'm quoting them. I'm not, believe me, I'm just explaining where they're coming from. Okay, I know it's sickening, but you just need to know what was going on. And history is not always pretty, as my ninth grade teacher once said. So, first thing, fear of race war. Second thing, fear of racial mixing. Third thing, fear of racial equality. That whites and blacks would have the same rights in U.S. society. These do, and this is the summary that Dew comes up with in his book. So what's interesting is two out of those three things have happened. We do have racial mixing. No one really cares. I guess some people care. There's more or less racial equality when it comes to voting anyway. Certainly there's not social or economic equality. But so two of these things came true, but the third one, the race war, has not come true. Well, although you could argue that the violence against blacks, that since the Civil War, the lynchings, the murders, maybe even the police shootings are in some ways a race war, but it's not a race war in the way that Southern whites feared. Really, it's often a war of whites against African Americans, which is not something they really talked about or cared about or were opposed to. So this is what Dew is up to. He comes to these conclusions about what Southern whites were afraid of.